All right, and we are live now here to chat about tonight's episode of Arrow and also tonight's episode of Supergirl because it was a two-part crossover tonight. The first two parts of four parts of Crisis on Earth X. So, I just wanted to say if you have any comments or anything you want to talk about, you can drop it in the chat below and I'll read it out, answer your questions. And the first thing that I wanted to talk about is just what your ratings are of tonight's episode. What did you like? What did you dislike? But first of all, what would you rate the episode on a scale from 1 to 5? So, 1 being it was terrible, awful, hated it, want my money back, want my time back, and 5 being it was fabulous. I loved it. I loved every second of it. Best crossover yet. So just let me know what you would rate it, and then we'll also get into and I'll do the same. Normally I have okay, so looking in the chat, we see somebody's giving it a 4. It's Stormy. Hi, Stormy. 4 is a pretty good rating. 4 out of 5. So that's kind of like a B. So that's pretty solid. And if you want, you can also give separate ratings to the Supergirl part and to the Arrow part if you felt like they were different. To me, they felt in tone. In past crossovers, I found that the different episodes really had different tones compared to each other. The Flash part was very like light and bubbly, and then like for the alien bit, and then the Arrow part was a little more gritty, and they kind of strayed away from, some of the meta stuff, and the Legends part was very legend. They had that in the past, and I can't judge the whole crossover sequence because of we've course just finished watching just the first two parts of it, but for me the Supergirl and the Arrow part really felt like it ran together as a 2-hour episode, and the tones were not, it was more just at different parts of the story. So the Supergirl part of the story revolved more around the wedding and the party leading up to that rehearsal dinner, whatever it would have been called. And then the Arrow part, you're already in the thick of it, and we already had invasions from another Earth, Earth 53, and that invasion involved Nazi versions of Green Arrow, Supergirl, and Wells. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think they've shown any. Oh, okay. The Prometheus Nazi, Tommy Merlin. That's the one I'm forgetting. So we had those, counterparts that were Nazis that definitely darkened the tone of a wedding crossover. Okay, so I'm looking in the chat. I waited 5 years for Tommy, and they make him a Nazi. So pissed at that. Yeah, yeah. I felt a bit shocked, I guess, at the beginning of both of these episodes. I guess I'll start with the Supergirl part, even though we're mostly talking about the Arrow characters here, if that's okay. I won't really get into Supergirl, Flash, or Legends characters too much. But at the beginning of the first episode of tonight's two-part sequence, I felt a bit shocked, I guess, seeing such a dark sequence. Um, it involved a Nazi killing a member of the resistance. And seeing that, on a show like Supergirl, that so often has serious topics, but in a light way and in a very, like you can kind of feel assured that on Supergirl you're going to see things handled, I guess, to a certain level of respect, that I was a bit shocked to see protests without warning or some sort of acknowledgement at the beginning of the episode that they were going to deal with something far more serious and far more significant, I guess, than what they've covered before. So I was a bit shocked at that. I mentioned as well on Twitter, and I saw a lot of people talking about this as well. We're totally here to see, our heroes destroy Nazis, but I think, especially for a show like Supergirl, it would have helped to see some sort of content warning type of thing, nodding to the fact that they're dealing with a very serious subject like this that has a lot of historical significance, especially considering how relevant the topic is present day, and that they aren't going to take this lightly. And also just to prepare viewers about sort of how different what they're going to be seeing is from perhaps what they've seen before. So I'm curious to know if you guys had a similar reaction to that. Did you have, were you mostly excited about the fact that it was a crossover? Were you expecting the fact that there would be, this type of villain? Did you already know that in advance from seeing previews and spoilers and stuff? Were you taken aback by how, severe this topic was, or were you happy with how they've handled it so far? I'm kind of curious. I think that's the main question that I have for those who've watched it. Is sort of, we're talking about this now live, right after it finished airing. What's your initial reaction? How do you feel after watching the first half of this? Are you feeling anxious? Are you feeling excited? And also, what do you want to see in the second two parts? So I'll start by answering those questions, and then you guys jump in the chat if you like. So how I would have rated that, how I do rate the episode, both episodes, after watching them back to back. First reaction, probably somewhere around 3.5, 3.75 out of 5. My reason for that, and normally, okay, so we have a comment. Can we talk about the the anti-chemistry of Nazi Oliver and Kara? That plot wasn't needed. That is exactly why I'm rating. Just referencing that comment in the chat. That type of thing is exactly why this episode for me is rated lower than what it would otherwise be considering the structure of the crossover. So let me explain what I mean by that. So in this crossover, we had a little bit of a deviation from what we've seen in previous crossovers, which is usually something centered around a plot point of convenience that forces one hero, somebody else for help. In this, it's kind of set apart as a separate event that's not going to really impact the storyline of any of the other shows. And it's just an opportunity for all the heroes to get together and fight a big bad villain team, whatever. And it's not going to have, like with Barry's time travel thing before that had far reaching effects on other shows. That was annoying. The alien thing was just out of tone for like it was not in tone for any of the different shows except for perhaps Supergirl, which Supergirl wasn't a part of the last crossover. So there were a lot of missteps I felt with past crossovers that from a structural standpoint were rectified in this crossover by having it come across as a separate event. And in fact, by moving shows from their other nights so that all of these episodes can air back to back sequentially, and quite a lot of it is in a different city, or in the case of the End of the Arrow episode, in a different world entirely, it can feel separate and just as a special event where all the heroes can fight together without long-term ramifications on their own show. So keeping all of that in mind, I was ready to rate this episode quite high, I think, except for when it came to the way the villain was portrayed. So we have the structure of the crossover, which is great, pretty good. Like, we got to do a crossover. That's pretty cool. Makes sense. Centers around a big event like a wedding. It's fine. Like it's that's something we can all get behind. We brought in the villains. I personally am not opposed to the show bringing in a super serious villain. I feel like for a standalone event, you have two ways of going with this. You can either have quite a cheesy villain that's a bit of a reach, which is definitely not what they went for, or you can go with a very serious villain slash topic that would need, 4 back-to-back episodes to really deal with it and unpack the ramifications of what they're wanting to explore here. And they went with the second one, but I'm not really sure. I definitely am sure that they did not give it the setup that it needed to why this is so significant, why this villain is so different from what they've handled before, and what the emotional implications are, and worldwide implications are of this entering this world. It's only at the very end of the Supergirl episode and the very beginning of the Arrow episode, we get a few comments that are quite short from some of the other characters. The main one, I think, is from Felicity, really talking about, well, here's the historical, motivation of this villain, like this is what Nazis do, and here's what their goal is, and there's a bit of a panned circular sequence in the Flash Cave or the Flash Star Labs area, where pretty much each of the ones present there make a sort of comment about like, we hate Nazis. Nazis want to do such and such bad thing. Like, you know, but there hasn't been a deep exploration about that. Okay, I'm looking in the chat. I just don't think having Nazis be the big bad was that well thought out. Yeah, it's just it's exactly that. It's, you know, if you want to have a super, I'm not opposed to these shows getting political. I'm absolutely fine with these shows getting political. I'm absolutely fine with seeing, you know, our heroes take a stand against Nazis and Nazi values and Nazi ideals and all of that. And obviously it's quite relevant to present day. And for, especially for some of these heroes, like the Green Arrow, for instance, their stories are quite closely woven into politics and taking a specific political stance. The Green Arrow, for instance, you know, obviously came at a time where social issues and social justice, there was a lot of change going on then for the better, and the Green Arrow presence in his world was used to parallel, you know, current day political affairs and to take a stand against that. So that it's fine. I like that. It's great, you know, and like I'm on board. Was this a good execution of that? Not so far. And again, this is kind of hard because we're trying to discuss, you know, I always do this show after an Arrow episode, and I want to discuss primarily the Arrow characters, and we'll, you know, end the serious part of this and get into some of the pros and some of the cute, fun, nice, badass, shippy, whatever moments here in a second. But in terms of the villain part, that hasn't been well explored yet, and we're halfway through. So that's all I'm saying. And I think that a lot of the setup would need to happen first. And I think going back to what Stormy said in the chat, some of what we've seen in terms of exploring the villain's motivations, in terms of exploring the villain's emotional depth, such as giving the villains a certain romance and having them, you know, well, one of them's dying and they're trying to protect the other and all of that, there was a lot of screen time spent on that more so than we have a Jewish heroine on Arrow. How does she feel? What are her feelings? What are her motivations? How is she reacting to this? And I felt like the time spent on who it could have actually focused on, the characters who, you know, again, a Jewish character, Black characters, Latina characters, gay characters, female characters, all of them and their reaction and the emotional implications for them was set aside in order to give emotional complexity to the villains. And that was a misstep. And that's a misstep that's reflected a lot in, I mean, in present day, we see that as well, but we won't even get into it. Okay, looking in the chat. I'm not sure if the CW can really portray how horrific Nazis are. Really just has them having the end of Arrow end in a concentration camp. Yeah, that felt like shock value, didn't it? A little bit. Oh, it was clearly a scene intended to shock us. But they didn't take really any time to explore the emotional implications or historical implications of what they were showing. It was a misstep, in my opinion. Back in the chat, they have so much diversity in the cast, most of the characters said very little. Yeah, and some of the characters that were pretty heavily highlighted were not the characters who would have been perhaps most strongly affected by this type of villain. So that was unfortunate. Yeah. So that covers, that's like my one big con. And any other little nitpick I would have, any other little minor thing of like red and yellow were the colors of the wedding, that's so tacky, or, you know, this, that, or the other, that pales in comparison to the way they handled the villain. So that's really the only con I'm going to mention for this. Stormy says, Stein is a Jewish guy and he's now in a concentration camp and he got nothing to say. Yeah. Yeah. That's, I mean, if they wanted to have the creative rights, I guess, which obviously they have the legal rights to use this, whatever, but if they wanted to deal with this topic in a fair way, they needed to highlight certain characters that they chose not to highlight, and that's unfortunate. Because you can deal with a villain who's targeting specific races, ethnicities, types of people, this sex, that sexual orientation, whatever. But then you need to put the spotlight on the heroes that most affects rather than the heroes that you always put the spotlight on. If you are a show that's always putting the spotlight on your main, white male character, whatever, and you want to deal with this type of villain, but you don't want to talk about the emotional implications for your other characters. I don't know. That was I hesitate to even call that a misstep because that just feels like refusal to do justice to this type of topic. It's just jumping back in the chat. It's just like when they had Felicity in a gas chamber, they didn't deal with that in season 4. Yeah, yeah, they did do that before, and that was, if I remember correctly, that episode actually fell during a month of remembrance or around some sort of day of remembrance, and they didn't really acknowledge the fact that they either didn't think about the implications, or when they did think about the implications, they didn't want to address it, or they didn't want to cut from their big fight sequence stuff and give some screen time to the characters that this affects. So yeah, I don't know. Also, okay, so let's get into some other stuff that went on. Let me get into some stuff that I do appreciate, which is going to really pale in comparison to the one big con, but like we do have to have some pros, right? So, some pros. I already talked about the fact that the format of this crossover is much better than the format of previous crossovers. True. Also, I appreciate that there are some ongoing type storylines that make the setting and or crossover content relevant. So, two examples of that. Well, I can give you more than two examples of that. So, we had a really great conversation between Stein and Caitlin Snow, right? Two characters, two different shows, but both had relevant sort of emotional beats that made that conversation really important for both shows. And both of them got to explore stuff that they haven't really got to explore on their other shows. Jumping the chat, I love the ladies bonding scene, especially Felicity and Iris. Wasn't that fantastic? That was so great. We don't get to see enough within and across shows of women getting to work together. So that was fantastic to see. It was great to see Felicity and Iris working together, being friends together, talking about, their own separate plot lines and situations like that. Which for Felicity, obviously, this sort of a two-part thing. She has, she's going to have a certain reaction to the fact that Nazis have invaded her Earth. That's pretty important. There's going to be a great, I already tweeted it, but there's going to be a great line / speech that she's going to have in the next episode in the Flash component, where she is really being the face of the resistance and saying, we won't surrender, we won't give up, we're not going to back down. It's really great. That's cool. Hopefully we'll see more of that. Great. But it's also great to see her and Iris. You also saw a little bit of her and Caitlin as well, like in the pedicure pre-wedding scene or whatever, talking as well about like relationships and the emotional development going on there, because Felicity has a lot of fear going into the fact that, she has a lot of fear about the idea of getting married, and Oliver wants to get married, and they're sort of already kind of married, but they haven't had a wedding really properly like celebrating that. So that's the second part of her emotional storyline, and it was really nice to get to see the ladies bond. Another great ladies bonding moment, with an asterisk caveat, is Alex and Sarah. That was cute. That whole like one night stand thing, that was very cute. However, the writing for after it was terrible. Not easy to write though. I'll give him a pass. Also, appreciated the Danvers sisters moments. That was really nice. It's good to see them actually get to like talk about things. It's good to see Kara be in a supportive role to Alex. Alex spends a lot of the time really supporting her. Stormy says, I really like the Alex and Sarah interactions. They were great. One of the things I'll just mention with that is every time there's a crossover, I just feel like, and maybe it's been so long since this that nobody even really remembers this because this is like a season 2 thing that I'm still holding on to. I really miss Sarah and Nyssa. Am I the only one who really misses Sarah and Nyssa? So every time there's a crossover, I'm just like, you could have called in Nyssa, and like if somebody's gonna have a one night stand, have we considered Nyssa? Anyways, that's just me. Drop a line in the chat if you're on the same page or not with that. But that was fantastic. Obviously, wedding, beautiful. I mean, I didn't like the red and yellow thing, that was tacky, but the rest of the wedding was really beautiful. The bridesmaid dresses and the everything, the bride's dress also beautiful. All of that was great. in the chat. I adore Nissa and Sarah. Yes. Okay, we got another one on board with that. Okay. So there was a lot of good going on there. And the emotional scenes that we did get primarily centering around Oliver and Felicity, which can't complain. That's like the one ship that they've covered in this crossover that I actually care about. Were really great. And I feel like in terms of, there's always going to be like a romantic type plot line in any of these crossovers, and the romantic plot line where like the romantic event is the wedding, but the romantic plot line where we're actually following a plot across this is Oliver and Felicity's, which I'm so excited about. I would rather a crossover follow their romantic plot line than their romantic event, than like center around their wedding, if that makes sense. Because I want their wedding to be on their own show. And it will be, spoilers. Well, I mean like their party part. So I appreciate that. I appreciate that we're following that. I'll appreciate it more once we've watched the last 2 episodes and we actually get to capitalize on the emotional development that they're going through right now, because right now it's in like the angsty part, and so we're right in the middle of the angsty part, and it's like have to wait till tomorrow. But I'll do that, and I appreciate that. Okay, looking in the chat, even with the angst, I understood where both Oliver and Felicity were coming from. Barry and Iris, shipping them is awesome. I'm so glad you enjoy that. I don't have they're not like my flash ship, but like I'm really happy for those who do enjoy them, that they're getting that beautiful moment. Hopefully you get another good beautiful moment that's not interrupted by a villain, cuz like I know what it's like when your ship has a great moment and then it's interrupted by a villain. That happens on Arrow quite a lot. So, hopefully you guys get that. But it was beautiful. I think as well, in terms of, this was on the Supergirl part of it, there was like a little moment there where their daughter like time traveled to be at their wedding. That's so cute. That's such a thoughtful thing to add. Again, not my ship, not my lane. I kind of feel it's very Lannistery, but for those who do ship it, you guys were given some great stuff. So love that. And they had the whole song that they had at the proposal, or like the 4th proposal that they had, whichever proposal stuck. They had that song again, whatever. That was great. In terms of understanding where both Oliver and Felicity were coming from, yes, Oliver wants to marry her because he loves her. She doesn't want to marry him because she loves him. And she kind of feels like it'll implode if they get married, because the last time they tried that, it did implode. So, like, didn't want to repeat history. So I get it. Makes sense. Again, just kind of looking forward to that being resolved in a good way, in the way that involves them getting married. Last little nitpick, and then I promise I'm done coming up with like negatives for this episode. Where was Diggle? Where was Thea, who's supposedly awake, or even some acknowledgement of her? And quite frankly, and I'm not even like loving like the team Arrow B team newbies, whatever. I'm not like their biggest fans or whatever. Like they're just there. But why were they only there for like 2 seconds on an Arrow episode? And where was Diggle? Like it's just, I don't know. That was probably, yeah, I guess that's my biggest complaint, other than the whole villain thing. Anyways, sorry to keep you guys a little bit later than 20 minutes. 3 minutes later than 20 minutes. Last question I have, also answer this in the chat if you have your thoughts on this, is what you would like to see going forward. Resolution on everything. My answer is just I want this crossover to completely be bookended. I want everything that happens in this to be sort of capsuled. This is a 4-episode, 4-hour, whatever event, and I just don't want it to impact the other shows that I care about, for there to be like too much long-reaching implications. And it sounds like it's going to be that way. It sounds like everything that happens in this will stay in this, other than like the engagements and weddings and stuff like that will like stick, which that's fine. That's chill. As long as Oliver and Felicity have their own party on their own show that's not like featuring everybody else. Just all about that, which they will. So I'm excited about that. So that answers everything for me. Thanks to everybody who watched. Thanks to everybody who tweeted in questions or posted questions or had any comments. Let me just make sure I didn't miss any ones on Twitter. A lot of stuff about about the crossover featuring Nazis. Yeah, that seems to be the main point of discussion there. I think I covered what I wanted to cover about that. It's yeah, don't mind to if you want to feature very real life esque villains, you just gotta give a real life esque reaction from your other characters, and you gotta really feature the characters who it impacts the most. And I think they missed the bar um today on that. Hopefully that was just a mistake, oversight, not anything intentional. I don't know. Anyways, look in the chat. Other than the Elicity wedding, I want Felicity and Arse getting to punch some Nazis. Wouldn't that be lovely? I think they both deserve to punch a Nazi, don't you? Alex and Sarah getting to punch Nazis was also fantastic. And high fiving afterwards was a cute scene. Also, really loved honorable mention. So, person I was watching with, his favorite moment in terms of like Nazi punching was the ice hand sword thing, getting to impale Nazis there in the church. That was fantastic. The Killer Frost transformation. That was great too. All of the above. Every woman on this show deserves to punch a Nazi. They've been through enough. All right. Thanks for joining me. Enjoy the 2 episodes tomorrow. And then if you want to hear / talk about my thoughts after all of those, I'll be recording podcast with Arrow Squad on Wednesday night, which will cover Arrow characters specifically, but across all 4 episodes. So that'll be after everything ends. If you want to let me know your thoughts, you can tweet me or you can leave feedback for us on arrowsquad.com, and then you'll actually be on the podcast if you do that. And we'll be talking about it there. I'm also going to be on another podcast recorded later this week on Multiverse Musings, also talking about the crossover as well. All those links will be on my Twitter. Sorry for keeping you so late. Thanks for joining me, and enjoy tomorrow's 2 more hours of the crossover. Bye, guys.